Welcome to this presentation of the Rotary Club of North Bethesda, Maryland, USA. Our club was established in 1974. We meet every Friday morning at 7:45 a.m., and we often invite guest speakers to give presentations on all kinds of interesting subjects. Please contact us through our website at nbrotary.org. And thanks for watching. Our speaker today is Cheryl Kollin. Cheryl is a business consultant and serves as the program director of Community Food Rescue, CFR, a program of Manna Food Center. Since its launch in 2015, the CFR network of 450 members has recovered and distributed 7.7 million pounds of food, the equivalent of 6.4 million meals, to people experiencing hunger. Cheryl is a founding member of the Montgomery County Food Council. She earned her MBA in Sustainable Business.
Good. Well, today I would love to talk to you about what our county is doing in terms of reducing food waste and also providing more food to people who are food insecure. I'm going to be talking about a program called Community Food Rescue, and it is a program of Manna Food Center, who I'm hoping that you're all familiar with. Manna Food Center is our largest food distribution center in Montgomery County. And today I'll be talking about this particular program. So Manna Food Center got started in the 1980s and now serves 50,000 families every year and distributes 3.3 million pounds of food through various programs. There are two locations, the main warehouse is in Gaithersburg, and then more recently, Manna opened up a choice food pantry in Silver Spring. You can see that in the lower left, where people make appointments and then they go in and literally grocery shop, although there's no cost for this food. And these are for families who are in need of supplemental food. There's also a great mobile market called Manny. You can see the white bus on the lower right, and then some beautiful produce that is from the Manna warehouse. So the reason why we need to think about food recovery in the first place is this dual problem that we have. On one hand, there's a lot of food that's wasted. In fact, it's 124,000 pounds of food that's wasted each year in Montgomery County. And when food is thrown out, edible food is thrown out, it wastes energy and water, and it also increases greenhouse gases. And everybody's been talking a lot about climate change now, and so wasted food waste, really has a huge impact on our environment. Then on the other hand, the flip side of it is that even though Montgomery County is one of the wealthiest counties in our country, 1 in 9 Montgomery County residents experience hunger. And 1 in 3 elementary school children qualifies for free or reduced meals. So what food recovery does then is take food that is edible from all sources and then redirects it to organizations that feed people who are in need. When you think about how food is wasted and how does this even happen in the first place, because no one wants to waste food, right? Well, it actually happens in lots of different locations. First, on the farms and in orchards, either when farmers have to grow and plant a increased amount of food because they have to hedge their bets against bad weather conditions or maybe some labor shortages or things like that. So not all food that is grown is actually harvested and sold. And then, of course, sometimes there's pests and diseases and things like that. Sometimes there's just a labor shortage, or it's just not economically feasible to, say, pick the last 1% of fruit that's growing on trees or in fields. Then if you think about going out to eat, how many people go out to eat and realize, wow, this food, there's so much of it, I can't eat it all, and I don't want to take it home for whatever reason. So there's a lot of plate waste there. At the grocery stores, also, if food doesn't look perfect, restaurant or grocery stores sometimes will throw that out. Or if a can of food is getting near its date on the label, then they can't sell it. So these are some examples of where food is wasted. And then, of course, food is wasted at home too. We're all guilty of it, of course. So you can think about 20% of the food we each buy never gets eaten. It might be sitting in the back of your refrigerator or your pantry. 90% of us throw away food too soon. We're not really sure if it's still good to eat, and just make sure we're just not going to eat it. And we're going to talk more about what those date labels on packages mean in a moment. Each of us tosses nearly 300 pounds of food every year. So if you pick up any can or packaged food, you'll see a date on that package. And that date means that it's the manufacturer's best estimate of when the food is at its peak quality to consume. It has nothing to do with food safety. So for those of us who look at a package and see that date, and if it's past date, it's still good to eat. There's a few exceptions, things like baby formula and certain prescription medicines, of course. You definitely want to abide by that date on the package. But things like canned foods and packaged foods, things like that, still perfectly good to eat. So check out the dates next time you look at that. And for canned foods, that's good a year or two beyond the date stamped on the can. Even a carton of eggs is perfectly good to eat up to 5 weeks past that date on the package. So a lot of people aren't aware of that. We have some great resources on our website that I'll talk about that gives you these guidelines to know when food is good to eat. And then, of course, if you go to the grocery store, you'll never see food like this. Some people call these the ugly vegetables. And if you go to a grocery store, everything looks perfect because they throw out everything that looks too big, too small, too funny shaped. Sometimes you'll see these things in the farmers markets, and sometimes a lot of this food just gets thrown away, but it's, again, perfectly good to eat. So Community Food Rescue, as I mentioned, is a program of Manna's, and Manna picks up food from the large grocery stores and the farmers markets, but there are still a lot of smaller food businesses that might be throwing away food and that we could capture. And so we wanted to start this program. Actually, it was a county funded program. It was a competitive grant, actually, and Manna won that grant to be able to create a food recovery program. And when we talked to the people who would be involved in this program, these would be nonprofit organizations. And in fact, there are several nonprofits, many nonprofits, or church-based groups that were already picking up food, say from one grocery store or one restaurant, and then providing that food to maybe members of their congregation or the broader community. But these were one-off events. They weren't, there was no connection, there was no network, there was no communication between the different organizations that were doing this in the community. And so we wanted to launch Community Food Rescue to bring all these different entities together, and together we could make a more impact. So when we brought our stakeholders together, these would be, as I said, the nonprofit organizations, church groups, community groups that were already doing food recovery, and perhaps some food businesses that might be interested in donating their food. We asked them, what would you like to see in a comprehensive food recovery program? So these were some of the criteria that they said we need: some kind of instant, real-time matching between when a food donor has food to donate and a food recipient organization, and we need somebody to pick up and deliver this food. And so we recognize that because of technology, there's some great technology. There was some great technology out there that does that matching between these three entities. So that was a very important criteria. It's very important that everybody who is participating abide by some uniform food safety guidelines, specifically for recovered food. And if you think about food, particularly fresh produce, meat, and dairy, that might have a shorter shelf life, it needs to adhere to some food safe handling practices for handling, packaging, transportation, things like that. And so Manna created these food safety guidelines that were then vetted by the Montgomery County Department of Health, and it's specifically for recovered food. As I mentioned, the nonprofits that were already doing food recovery oftentimes didn't have good transportation to spend their time picking up food and delivering it, so they wanted some kind of delivery service. The stakeholders also wanted to have a place where people could share information, the organizations could share information with each other, and then also to be recognized for the good work that they're doing in the community. And lastly, and maybe even most importantly, that this should be a free service for all members. So not just the nonprofits that were receiving the food, but also for the businesses that were donating food, that it should be a free and easy to use service. So this was a very tall order, but we had our marching orders and we created Community Food Rescue, launched in 2015 for that. Simply put, we like to say that Community Food Rescue is like the Lyft or the Uber of food recovery. And we've now grown into a network of 450 network members. You can see 274 food businesses, 118 recipient organizations, and 60 active volunteer food runners. As Linda mentioned in her intro, we've now recovered and distributed 7.7 million pounds of food of all kinds. And the way that our program works, our website is communityfoodrescue.org, and it's free to sign up for everybody. And the first step in being part of this food recovery effort is to go online and sign up. So if you're a food donor business, you go on our website and you click on this link that says donate, and then that will take you to a series of screens that will explain how the donation process works, gives you the set of food safety guidelines, and then invites you to sign up using our matching tool that is called Chow Match. Same thing if you're a volunteer and you want to deliver food, and same thing if you're a nonprofit organization and you'd like to receive food for your organization that then you can distribute to people who are food insecure, and you'd click on that feed link. So as I mentioned, with this software called Chow Match, it's a subscription license, so we provide it to all of our members for free. And that we started it back in 2015, and we were the software was developed by a small one-person company in San Francisco who developed it for their food recovery program. And we've worked with the software developer and have enhanced the software ever since. Since we're in the trenches using this all the time, we could give the developer some good ideas of how we'd like to see the software evolve. And of course, as our needs in our community has evolved, certainly during COVID, we've been able to have the software enhanced to keep meeting our changing needs of our community. So in the Community Food Rescue Program, we can pick up and distribute all kinds of food. So everything from the shelf-stable foods, fresh produce that might come either from a grocery store or directly from a farm or a farmer's market. Certainly prepared foods from caterers and restaurants. We pick up frozen foods, baked foods, raw foods, meat, dairy, and eggs, and so on. Once we had our program up and running for a couple of years and we felt good about what we were doing in that basic kind of pickup from these established organizations or businesses and delivering it to our organizations, we started thinking about, well, how else can we recover food? So a few years into the program, we recognized that there's a lot of fresh produce that's kind of on its last legs. It's still good to eat, but it would be better if it were cooked rather than eaten raw. And so we partnered with some amazing groups in our county, which included professional chefs from some of the major hotels like Marriott and Hilton, and other individual professional chefs. We partnered with a group called Kind Works that runs a volunteer program. And we partnered, of course, with members of our CFR members who are recipients of these foods. So these are shelters that are feeding people, but they don't have their own cooking facilities. So they rely on the community to provide prepared food and bring it to them so they can just warm it up and then serve it at their shelters. So we also partnered with a church in Silver Spring, the United Methodist Church in Silver Spring at Four Corners, and that had just remodeled their kitchen, and Manna was able to use this kitchen. And we had a fantastic time bringing these members of the community together. As I mentioned, professional chefs, members of Kind Works, and we pick up this bruised or wilted or almost at the end of its lifespan produce. We would take some meat and shelf-stable ingredients from the Manna warehouse, and in 3 hours we would cook a delicious, healthy, nutritious restaurant quality meal for about 100 people. And thanks to the volunteers, it was really a win-win-win. Everybody loved this program. So everything from the chefs who were given kind of a challenge, because sometimes they didn't know until the last moment what kind of vegetables or fruits they would have to work with. And they'd have to create a menu right there on the spot. The volunteers, of course, loved it because they were working not only with each other, but they got guidance from a professional chef and maybe increased their cooking skills, their knife skills, and so on. And then, of course, the people that we served with this food loved getting a delicious restaurant quality meal. And it really made them feel like that they were special, and they are special, and they should receive quality food just like everybody else. We ran this program for 3 years until COVID. And then, of course, we had to shut it down. Some of the other ways in which we are able to rescue food is a gleaning program. You may be familiar with that term from the Bible. It comes from the Bible. The idea of gleaning the fields for the poor, which means that farmers were to leave a certain percentage of their crop in the field so that the poor could also eat. And in this case, we partner with some of our local farms, and they invite us to come on their farms at the end of a commercial harvest. So this might mean that it's not worth paying their laborers to pick that last few percentages of the, for instance, strawberries that's viewed here in the field, or apples at the end of their harvest, or in the case of a few years ago, there was a terrible hail damage on apples. So they couldn't be sold commercially, but they were, again, perfectly fine to eat. We had our volunteers come in and pick the orchards, and then that got directed to Shepherd's Table, where they do cook a from scratch meal every day. And we're very, very happy to receive those apples and then cook them. So this gives you some ideas here. Sometimes, in this case, the strawberries were gleaned at Butler's Orchards and then directed to some of those schools I mentioned earlier that are on free and reduced meals. And in one case, the school kids who were receiving these delicious strawberries remarked, one student said, what's that green thing on top of the strawberry? So they had never eaten a fresh strawberry before, which makes me so sad to realize that that's the reality, but so happy to know that we could be sharing this delicious fresh produce with some students. So this just gives you a glimpse of some of the Manna staff that work out of the warehouse. And then when COVID hit, Manna saw that there was a 34% increase in need. And so through some of the programs that are listed here, the Food for Families, Mobile Kitchen, and so on, that Manna has been able to increase and meet that need. And partly thanks to community members who have stepped up. So during COVID, we had to launch and really pivot and launch new programs. One of the programs was a home delivery program. So you may remember in the very early days of COVID, nobody was going out. And it was really important for people who were more vulnerable in our community, whether through illness or not able to get out to pick up food at Manna directly. Manna launched a home delivery service where we would take the food that normally people would pick up at the warehouse or a distribution site and directly provide it to their homes or apartments. And that was all done through volunteers. We had 300 additional volunteer food runners pick up food and deliver it during those early days of COVID. A lot of people were working from home or had a lot of extra time on their hands and wanted to give back to community. So it was really such a great program to do. And now instead of volunteers, Manna staff is continuing that home delivery program for the most vulnerable in our community. Another program that we launched during COVID and continues to grow is called our Farm to Food Bank program. So again, in the early days of COVID, you can imagine a lot of restaurants closed. They stopped their contracts with local farmers who had produce in the fields, and schools closed. So the farmers didn't know what to do with this food, and they then immediately lost their contracts. So thanks to some generous grants that we received, Manna was able to now purchase farmers' produce directly, and then that produce would get distributed to the nonprofit organizations in the CFR network. And we continue that program today. You can see before COVID, Manna worked with 4 farms. In 2020, at the beginning of the pandemic, we grew that to 18 farms and purchased and then delivered 18,000 pounds. Last year, this was taken kind of midway through 2021. We worked with 32 farms and distributed 60,000 pounds. We are continuing that program. We're so fortunate to have this grant-funded program. It helps the farmers. It helps people who are food insecure to get fresh, local, delicious food. And I'm very, very excited to continue that program. Here you can see some of the farmers, some of whom are new farmers, young farmers, people of color, women farmers, that are in some cases growing food from their native countries, that are serving populations of people from other countries who really appreciate some of the produce that you normally wouldn't see in grocery stores here. We did a survey of our food assistance providers and asked them what kinds of food should farmers be growing for these diverse populations that are represented in Montgomery County. And so from that information, we've passed that on to the farmers who are in some cases growing more diverse kinds of vegetables, things like edamame and daikon radish, tomatillos, mustard greens, things like that, bok choy. So coming back to those of us at home, what can we do at our homes to reduce food waste? Here's some ideas that you can do. We mentioned these dates on food. It does not mean that food is bad. In fact, it's not really expired dates. It's just past dates. As I mentioned, it's the manufacturer who stamps that label on the can or the package. And on our website, we have some great flyers, brochures that talk about how you know when food is safe to eat and what those date labels mean. Help keep your refrigerator organized so that you know that the food that should be eaten first should be at the front of the refrigerator and not at the back. Think about family meals, that you can plan your meals ahead of time, make grocery lists, and shop exactly for what you're going to use and cook that week so that the food doesn't go bad. And this is a fantastic website for meal planning and a lot of other ideas and tips about how to not waste food at home. It's called savethefood.com, and it's a great resource. So I wanted to leave you with our website, communityfoodrescue.org. Feel free to check it out. A lot of great resources, not only for what we're doing in the community that our network members are sharing with one another, but also gives you, as I mentioned, some videos and some brochures about what you can do at home. And if you've got some extra time and want to help out in the community, we're always looking for some great volunteers during your free time. So we don't have a set requirement for how many hours you must work if you join the network. But if you'd like to volunteer, you can do so and pick up food runs that works for your schedule. So there's no obligation, but we would invite you to do that. It's also a great way to get families involved with their younger children who can accompany them on food runs and really kind of see what's happening in the community to help out in a very meaningful way, to pick up food, whether it's from a small food vendor, a small grocery store, or maybe go up directly onto a farm and then deliver it to one of the over 100 organizations that we have in our network. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and see if anybody has any questions.
Anybody have any questions?
Yes, I have a question, Cheryl. Do you have a connection with the Capital Area Food Bank?
Yes, Manna is a member of the Capital Area Food Bank. So the way that food banks work is that there's a whole network. It starts really at the national level. So there's a national group, and then the Capital Area Food Bank is a member of them, and then Manna is a member of the Capital Area Food Bank. So absolutely.
Yeah, thank you.
I think the food waste problem in this country is probably a tribute to the bounty of this country and how much food we have. And I know that my parents grew up in pre and during World War II Europe, and they canned all their foods. I mean, they knew how to not waste food. My father and mother would always say, you don't throw anything out. They would go to the farms down in what is now Silicon Valley. The pear orchards were down there, and after the canneries came through there, they would be like 4 or 5 pears in each tree or on the ground, and my parents would give them a couple of salamis that they had and let them pick up all the pears that were left over. They filled their trunk in the back seat with pears. They'd take it home, and we'd have like about 100 jars of canned pears for the winter, and so we don't do that in this country because it's just so easy to go to the grocery store and take what you want, and if it goes bad, and I guess you sort of you get that mentality in this country for people who've lived in Europe or out of this country in areas that have food deprivation. They come here, they become like Americans, and we don't eat anything that's expired, and we throw it out because we don't want to. That's just the mentality. Linda?
Sarah, let me ask you, more often, is it that there are more suppliers in the county than there's need, or more need than the suppliers at this point?
Do you mean specifically in terms of food recovery and our network? Yeah, well, we try and have a balance, but right now, and particularly because of COVID, and a lot of potential food donor businesses have closed. I'm sure you've seen that just driving around different communities. We have more need than we have suppliers. And one of the really great programs, as I mentioned, that Farm to Food Bank program has become a much more important aspect of community food rescue. So instead of the small restaurants and small grocery stores that might have closed during COVID, we're now working more directly with the with local farms. And as I said, we've got over 30 farms in our network that we're buying food from and then distributing that for free to our food assistance organizations. And they're really so appreciative of getting this amazing fresh local produce. But we're hoping that as more food businesses come back or new ones open up, for instance, there's going to be a new Mexican restaurant in Bethesda opening up, we hope in June, called Tecumbe. And not only are they interested in donating any food that might be left over, but they actually have a social mission. They have a foundation, and they're committed to making a certain number of meals. In this case, and here in this particular restaurant, about 250 meals every week, and then donating them through our network. And we've designated 3 organizations that I mentioned are shelters that for people who are not able to cook, where these prepared meals would be particularly appreciated. And, you know, there's so much of a factor of dignity. And in the case of Tecumbe, the food that they're donating is going to be exactly the same food that they sell. So it's fresh, quality, delicious food that is prepared and packaged just as if you were to go into the restaurant and buy it yourself.
We'll have to leave it there. Thank you very much for the interesting talk, and we'll all certainly want to contribute to saving food and not wasting as much as we can. All right. Thank you very much for coming, and thank you for speaking.
Thank you, Cheryl.
My pleasure. Great to meet everybody. Thanks so much for inviting me.
Pleasure to have you here. Thank you.
Great.